the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Welcome to the SpotTrack.com podcast. I'm Kevin Sylvester along with Paul Peck and, of course, the founder of SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti here. And we are going to talk about teams that are wise with their money, Mike. Sometimes, like the teams that are financial underdogs, we're calling them, are doing well in professional sports here, which doesn't seem like that would be the case.
Fans always think you need to spend the most money in order to win. And I think, Mike, what you're going to show us is that money spending does not always equal wins.
I've been telling my family that, like, hey, if we don't spend the money, back to sports. Sorry.
Yeah, I think really I think teams thought they had to spend a lot of money to win too. I think that was the trend that sort of took over for the last decade or so, and it's really starting to trend the other way. We're seeing some really nice values, not just players, but rosters. I mean, depth charts, things like that we track on SpotTrack, they're really starting to come together and round into form in terms of value in different spots, right? So we've talked in the past about, the major positions, right? The spending positions in every sport, the wide receivers, the quarterbacks, your goaltenders, maybe,
Yeah, sure.
Used to be your big men in basketball, but that's obviously gone away. So, you've got your trends, and they shift in terms of position, and they shift in terms of finances as well. And we've seen that, in terms of how rosters are being spent in free agency, how rosters are being built at the draft, and how draft picks are becoming bigger assets for all these different sports. And what's happening is you're getting balanced rosters. And that's really the theme of what's happened with these different sports. You're seeing teams who are trusting their process. Again, we'll get back to that. Who have a plan in place, who understand that timing is a big factor in terms of your spending and when you're able to spend and when you're not, when you can utilize the draft more, when you can spend in free agency more. And we're at a point now where there are just a lot of teams in these four major sports that have figured out their plan and are enacting it, and they're winning because of it.
Let's talk about the NHL here in hockey. And before we get to a couple of specific teams, because there's one that's just remarkable this year in the NHL, but you mentioned goaltender. And for a while there, let's go back 20 years ago, maybe 15 years more recently, it was, hey, you've got to pay money to get the best goalies in the world, the Marty Brodeurs, the Dominic Haseks, the Eddie Belfours. Patrick Waz. And these are great goaltenders. All of a sudden, teams figured out, you know what, and I've made this argument a lot, and people are like, you're nuts, but you don't need a great goalie to win the Stanley Cup. You need your goaltender to play great when it comes to be that time, but you do not need a great goalie, the best in the league overall, and pay him all that money and tie up cap space. You need skaters around him to limit the chances against him.
The blocked shots prevalence in the NHL has changed that.
It certainly has, but you look at Crawford with the Chicago Blackhawks, and I'll use the Blackhawks. They won 3 Stanley Cups. They've done it with 2 different goaltenders. Doesn't mean their goaltenders did not play great, because they did, but that you can't tell me that Crawford is, you say, well, this guy's one of the great goaltenders of today. You'll name 3 guys before you name Crawford of the Chicago Blackhawks. And I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but he also has Keith and Seabrook in front of him, and Kane and Taves carrying the puck with Sharp. Unbelievable skaters in front of him.
You hit the nail on the head, I think, with a point a couple sentences back. There were 2 goaltenders on that team. And I think a lot of teams have done that, and that's not just hockey. I think we're seeing that in these positions. We're seeing it at the quarterback position. Let's look at the Super Bowl here. So what you're seeing is it's not necessarily great to pay an elite player elite money, because, and this is something I've seen in 7 years of running SpotTrack valuations and projections and things like that. There's not that much difference in how these guys can perform if they're given a legitimate chance, if their sample size is big enough. There's just not that big of a difference between player 14 and player 2. Every so often you're going to have a standout. You're going to have your Calvin Johnson and your Le'Veon Bell and, your player that's just so much better, Mike Trout, right?
Yeah.
Their numbers are just so much better that you can't even value other guys against them when it comes to what I do. That you just throw them out the window. So, but other than that, you're number 2 ranked and you're number 15 ranked in terms of statistical production. There's just not that big of a difference. And it turns into the money not needing to be that much different either. So is it worth it to spend number 1 money, when you're seeing these guys like a Stafford get this gigantic contract? Or are you okay spending number 4 money, knowing you can pay your backup, maybe in the 20s, something like that, so that you can know that your roster is full of depth. Let's just bring the Patriots up right now, because that's what we're going anyway here, right? is it better to build with depth, with not a superstar contract at the major positions, or is it better to have the best players on the field at all times? It's something to talk about.
Well, analytics has done a great service to general managers, to fans, Paul, but it's done a disservice to established veterans in sports because it's taken money away from them because you look at age, production, and as Mike was mentioning, the gap between second best player and 15th is not that great.
And here's where this goes, Mike. Scouting is so much better now than it ever was before. And I'll spin you back to the point here, which is ultimately in any sport, the most talented teams win. You can have great coaching. You need to. All that other stuff is great, but give me a most talented team and I'm going to win more often than if you have a really good coach with a less talented team. So the challenge now becomes, how do you get to be the most talented team? And I think what's happening in pro sports is, as scouting has gotten so much better, you're getting more talent more often, so you don't have to pay as much. Does any of that make sense at all in this argument?
It does. It's knowing when to let go, right? It's knowing when that veteran
Patriots are kings of that.
Yeah, it's knowing when to, when that top dollar is too much and you have to fold over. And it's also, you mentioned having the best team. It's also having the healthiest team.
True.
Right? And that's just something you have to think about before week one these days. I mean, when you're building this roster every offseason, when you're turning things over, it's what happens if he goes down, and what happens if he goes down, and can we survive, really? I mean, Aaron Rodgers, we've seen it twice now with the Packers. They can't survive.
Right. But then look at the Eagles. Look what the Eagles have done. Look at the list of guys who are not playing for them. I would love for you, and it probably won't get to the top of the list because Carson Wentz wasn't making mega quarterback money. I would love for you to see where the injured salary list ranks for the Eagles of any team that's ever been in a Super Bowl before.
Yeah, it's something
not to give you more work.
Yeah, we'll get there, but it is something to talk about because you can't just discount these injured reserve lists every year. You can't. They're growing. There's more prominent players on them every single season. It's not good for TV. It's not good for football. It's certainly not good for a team. But teams need to start including this as a factor as they're building every single year because it's a reality. They really can't stop it, especially in the more violent sports, your hockeys and your footballs. But they need to be ready for it. They need to have a roster that can handle it.
Let's talk about baseball. Because a few weeks ago, we talked about baseball and how there really wasn't an explosion of spending in the hot stove season. And it still is an explosion of spending. So do you think they've caught on to what's happened, not only this year with the Astros, who were 15th in total payroll in Major League Baseball, which goes to the point of, hey, you don't have to spend all the most money in order to win. You look at the Indians in 2016, right? 22nd in payroll in Major League Baseball. Baseball's catching on where, you know what, we don't need to. Now, listen, they're spending a lot of money, but we don't need to spend with the Yankees to win.
No, there are teams that are taking advantage of those first 6 years, which are dirt cheap. It's just happening. You're seeing a youth infusion in this league, and a lot of it is international. I mean, the league has had to come around and really actually change the international process because teams were abusing it at some point. So, but you're seeing the Royals and the Indians and the Astros, these smaller market teams, get better very fast because of an infusion of youth, because they've been able to build players up from the bottom and not have to go and spend $150 million in free agency. So obviously, that's a timing thing as well. So, you're seeing the Royals right now sort of get gutted in terms of those guys moving on to their big contracts and not being able to keep up with that, we think. But again, when the window is there for these smaller teams, they can absolutely hack it. They can absolutely take their small young players and run into the postseason and into the World Series. So it's not an accident. It's something that they have to realize beforehand, as we saw with Sports Illustrated and the Astros, right? The prediction. So it's a real thing, and these small market teams, they need to understand their window and go and build when it's ready.
It's part of, you mentioned the international part. Paul, I wonder if part of it is the advanced training in youth sports where,
players are better at a younger age than they ever had been before.
I mean, there's, when we were kids, there weren't catchers clinics and hitting cages year round in cold weather,
videotape analysis of your swing, all that stuff.
Like A-Rod going to the IMG Academy is like one of the first ones that I ever heard of. Like, whoa, this is happening. There's IMG academies all over the place now.
Right. Yeah. The question I have for you, Mike, is that model sustainable? Or does it not matter? If the Houston Astros won a World Series and they maybe win another one, but then they probably are going to have to either make decisions to let those guys who are up for contracts either go or sign them, maybe they or their fans won't care if there's a step back. But that's my only worry about what the Astros are doing is, are they going to be able to sustain that? Because it's going to come home to roost. They're going to have to pay Altuve and those guys at some point soon.
Yeah, there's no way it's sustainable, right? That's what I'm talking about, this window. There's probably a 3 to 4 year window. That's maybe even generous. Maybe it's 2 to 3 years where these teams have lightning in a bottle, right? I mean, the Cowboys,
Royals are a
Royals.
prime example. You're seeing it with the Pirates, who are now gutting what was a team that never really won big, but sort of captured the market.
Right. While you mentioned that, all Pirates fans just must be sick over McCutchen, right?
The whole team. I mean,
right.
They sent their number one pitcher, their best outfielder. It looks like they're going to send a couple more guys. Yeah, they're gutting it because they realize that window has passed for them. They can't spend in free agency like they want to, and that's an example right there. But will the Houston Astros ever get there? I don't know. Right, because it's pretty obvious they have a scouting analytics system in place that has worked, and those guys aren't sitting in the stands watching Astros games. Let's be honest; those guys are out, in other countries and across America, finding the next wave, the next window.
Right.
So
if you're not worried about, if you have enough confidence in your ability to find the next Jose Altuve, then you let Jose Altuve go when he becomes a $200 million or $400 million player, right?
So that's the question, though. That's the question.
It's always a question.
They have the stones to do that?
I don't know. You
I mean?
mentioned Matthew Stafford. Do the Lions have the stones to have not paid him because they think they can go find the next one?
I think we're going to see it with the Jacksonville Jaguars too.
There you go.
Do they have the stones to get rid of a quarterback who just took them to the AFC Championship game, right?
Who they probably, in all honesty, know just hasn't lived up to what they thought he would live up to.
But you kind of see this in these different sports, right?
All right, but what are you paying? We'll use Blake Bortles, for example, or Altuve. What are you paying these guys for? You're looking at you're thinking regular season salary, right? But the fans want them paid for those moments where in the playoffs to go and win. And I think when fans look at the money, they might say, this guy's making Stephon Gilmore. We'll use him for the Patriots. $14 million. He makes a great play for the Patriots in the AFC champion.
Yep.
Saves the game.
Worth every penny.
Right. Blake Bortles, you look at like, wow, the guy played a great game and lost, why would you want to move on from him? Like when it mattered, he won on he won a game with his legs against Buffalo. He won on the road in Pittsburgh. And then he goes to New England and did almost everything. I question play calling there at the end for the Jags, or the lack of a penalty. But whatever. He played a great game in New England on the road in the AFC Championship game. Those are the things you pay players for, right? If you're in it to win championships, then that's what you're paying for.
Is it worth $16 million, though? Because that's the raise he's due next year.
He's due to make $16 million more or $16 million, period?
$19 million total, $16 million more than this year.
Sure. I mean, if that's what you're paying a quarterback in the National Football League, that's what a starting quarterback, a good starting quarterback, that's the going rate. Yes. Is it better than paying Kirk Cousins $30? Yes.
All right. I want to throw something at you, Mike. This has got me.
I'm going back to last week's podcast, the mother of all quarterbacks,
and this applies to any sport. Are we getting closer to the point in professional sports where, I don't know the fans will ever accept this, but the teams will? You draft a guy, you play him for his rookie contract, and you let him go, and you don't even think twice about re-signing him to a second contract. Are we getting closer to that era in every level of professional sports?
If the sports allow it. Because, I mean, you're seeing it in football right now. You're seeing these franchise tags are starting to really hurt. They're hurting these players. They're hurting, rosters. They're hurting the value of positions. I mean, I don't know if Le'Veon Bell's getting a contract this year. And that's unbelievable.
And he's the best running back in the league.
Maybe
and
in
they're
the last 10
thinking
years.
about whether they want to bring him back or not.
If that's the kind of trend that we're really going to see, where a player like Case Keenum can make $23 million and Le'Veon Bell can make a maximum of 14, guaranteed. I don't know that the players and the NFLPA will allow for this too long. I really don't, because you're looking at your NBA salaries. We don't need to talk about that in terms of how big those are getting and the guaranteed money that goes with it. But teams would love that. Teams would love to be able to draft every year and know that 4 years down the road they've already got the next guy in line. That just doesn't work.
No.
It hasn't worked for the last 30 years. It's not going to work. You're going to have to pick and choose. It's going to have to be positionally, but you're going to have to get past this franchise tag phase, in my opinion. You're going to have to be smarter than that in terms of how you manage your money, because the franchise tag doesn't apply to value here, right? There's a reason you don't see the Patriots using that on their major positions, and there's a reason the Patriots don't ever have a top 10 payroll, in terms of their cap annually. So it's just a bad look for your cap table. It's a bad look for your relationship with your players, right? Especially prominent positions like we're talking about here. So will there be quick rookie contracts and then a turnover? Sure. In some cases, that's going to become more prevalent because rookie contracts are phenomenal. The wage scale is phenomenal.
Yeah. So much more value versus money. Kevin, hold your thought for just a second. If this becomes more prominent, maybe we're talking about it in football. If this becomes more prominent, I'm going to tell you the moment that it started to happen.
Yep.
The moment that I think this started to happen is when teams started to realize that running backs were not worthy of high draft picks. Now we're seeing that spin back a little the other way now.
Fournette.
But when teams said we churn through these guys, they have a limited shelf life. I'm going to pick one in the 4th round. Run the crap out of them for 3 years and go pick another one in the 4th round because my production will be just as good. I wonder if that's what started to change the mentality in the NFL about that approach. Now, you can't do it with quarterbacks. I understand that they're too hard to find, but I wonder if it's filtering into other positions.
You know what I think? I think it takes a really bad draft class. I really do. I think it takes like 2 years, maybe it took 2 years of just really bad running backs drafted high, and we saw that. We really did. And I think we may be seeing that with that 2011 wide receiver crew or 2013.
Yeah.
Is that the draft class that says we can't be paying $15 million a year to these wide receivers because there's 6 of them and they're all worth 10? You know what I mean? So I think it takes maybe just one stinger to shock everything, and then all these teams sort of come around to the fact that there's a new trend, there's a new way to do this, and if we all kind of jump on board, then this will be the way to do it. What I don't want to happen is I don't want Le'Veon Bell's getting franchise tags. I don't want that to be the trend. I don't want a running back worth $14.5 million on a salary cap.
Never get your return on investment.
Me as the money guy here, I don't want $15 million into one running back 1 year. That's ridiculous.
Right, who's one hit away from being out of your lineup.
There's no depth there, right? There's no depth. Fitzgerald Toussaint is not a backup that's going to win a Super Bowl for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's be honest here. So there's my side of it, there's the roster side of it, and then there's just logic to it, right? And I think when you see a draft class that works, people want to pay through the roof. People want to see it happen every single year, and that's just not good business.
You can have success. We've talked about the major sports where teams can have success not spending the most money. Although there's one sport we haven't talked about, and that's the NBA.
Elephant in the room,
right? The NBA. There's never. I'm going to make a statement that is very generalized, but I think it's easy to believe. Right? There's never going to be a team in the bottom third spending the NBA that's going to win the NBA championship. Is there?
It seems impossible. It seems impossible just because there's less players that need to be impacted in terms of a depth chart, right? And there's maybe 6-7 guys on a roster that really matter in terms of on-court production.
It's the only sport where one guy can change an entire franchise.
That's right.
Well, but you need 3 in the NBA now,
supposedly,
because you can. Well, if you don't, then we'll see the Bucks, right? I mean, they're pushing, but they need more than just the Greek Freak.
Yeah, I mean, I'm waiting to see one of those teams sort of push through a little bit and kind of break up this boys club in terms of guys getting together and pushing for a championship, because I don't know if that's good for basketball.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, I don't think it's good. It's certainly not good for salary caps. I can tell you that right now.
I was explaining this to my sons. They were playing NBA 2K, and they had the old Lakers going, and I would explain to them the Celtics, play the old Celtics, and you had about 5 or 6 teams where they had one superstar. They had other good players around them, but you never would have seen Magic Johnson and Larry. You saw it on the Dream Team. That was it. That's when they got together, right? I mean, the Golden State Warriors are a dream team right now. So are the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Houston Rockets.
I can't see a way where this just continues to work and work and work and work, because unless the money is just ridiculous and in terms of how much these teams are actually earning on the side, You know what I mean? If the revenue is, unless the revenue really is this big, there's going to be a bubble burst here in terms of where these salaries are going. Because look at we're 3 years away from LeBron James being worth $50 million a year. So I mean, that's going to be a real thing. That's going to be his salary. You know what I mean? So
he makes more off the court.
Yeah, but that's not even discussable. I mean,
right.
He can go do that whatever he wants. But I'm saying he's going to play 82 games and make $50 million.
That's
so
unbelievable.
We're getting to that point. That's coming. That's around the corner here. And it sounds unbelievable. It is unbelievable. And I just don't know if that's sustainable. And it's certainly not good for the rest of the league, because they're going to have another discussion with another CBA to make sure that these guys coming into the league, or these veteran minimum players and all that, are somewhat, given a raise, a bit of a raise. I mean, because you're going to have guys at $2 million and guys at $50 million playing on the same court, playing similar minutes, and that's just not going to work.
It's like media salaries. So there's a huge disparity.
Yeah.
But the minimum is not the $2 million. But the interesting thing with LeBron, we talked about spending and money. The team that pays LeBron $50 million is not getting the best LeBron. There's a lot of miles on that luxury vehicle there.
Yeah.
I mean, every year to the finals.
Yeah.
Every year to the finals, and that's a lot of basketball, and he's getting up in age, and that's when, you'll see nagging. He won't be able to play as many minutes in order to go – and that doesn't mean he won't be good or even great, but he's not going to be how he is now.
I just wonder if the league begins to refine that salary cap a little bit, because it's on them. I mean, they can say that number is as high or as low as they want it to be every year in terms of how the revenue is structured. So, it may be good business for them to say, we need to start bringing this down to earth a little bit, because we've got a situation where we do have aging superstars.
Sure.
You know what I mean? There may be a bubble bursting in terms of the turnover. There's a good amount of young youth of talent in the league that's coming up right now.
If you're the players, you want it, Mike. Let me jump in here. Because
no doubt.
This stuff's negotiated in collective bargaining agreements. And think about this: if you're the players, it's a myopic view to say, we want the top salary to go to 50. Hey, if you're the Utah Jazz,
right,
you want to keep Gordon Hayward on your team. You want to have a chance to beat the bigger market teams, the way they could back in the day when John Stockton and Karl Malone were Hall of Famers for the Utah Jazz and stayed with the Utah Jazz because they could compete, because the other teams couldn't sign them to huge dollar contracts and bring them all together.
Well, that's the discussion, right? I mean, you kind of mentioned it there. Do these leagues want the parity? Do they want it? The basketball certainly doesn't right now. The basketball is just fine with Cleveland and Golden State and Oklahoma and San Antonio winning every year. They're fine with it. Their TV ratings are through the roof. Their superstars are happy. They're good. Are these other sports happy with it? Because the parity is much more prevalent in these other sports. No question. Look at this Final Four we had with football. We've talked about some baseball in the past couple of years. The World Series, teams coming from the bottom of the payrolls, and we're seeing that in hockey as well here this year. So there's more parity in other leagues, less in basketball, and I guess the question is, what's better for any of them, really?
2 football follow-ups for you. You just mentioned it, and I'm thinking of this, and you've cited the Patriots as the way they do it. So many teams are trying to do it the way they do. Well, we just saw a wave of coaching hires around the NFL where almost every one of them had a Patriots connection. You've got 4 general managers around the league that used to work under Bill Belichick. Mike Vrabel, Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels are all going to be head coaches. So the Patriot influence around the league will be spreading. Can everybody else do it the way they do it?
They need to sell it hard, because the reason the Patriots can do it is because they've earned the right to do it, right? I mean, they've these ridiculous amount of wins, and
they have the greatest of all time at the single most influential position.
That's right. So obviously, their situation sells itself. So when guys come and take $3-4 million less than they could anywhere else, that's not an accident. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The approach has to be, we're going to take the Patriots way, and that needs to be the sell. We're not here. We're not here, to be one and done. We're here to win for 10 years. And in order to do that, this is the structure. This is what I know. This is how they're doing it. We want that. We want 20 years of success. We don't want, 2 years of success. So in terms of how the hard salary cap works, the Patriots definitely have it figured out. I mean, they're in the middle of the pack this year in terms of what their cap spending. Obviously, they stayed fairly healthy. That was a big deal for them. They lost a couple of key players early. They made some uncharacteristic free agent spending this offseason, which kind of raised some eyebrows. But certainly that worked out in terms of a couple of players at the end of the year here. They just sort of know when to pull the trigger on all these situations. They really do. They know when to release. They know when to trade. They know when to sign. They know when not to sign, which is maybe the most important thing. So they certainly have it figured out. You're right. They are starting to be, perplexed across the league. There's going to be some teams who tried to do this year for sure. I mean, you're going to see it in Indianapolis, which is going to be super interesting when they start to gut that roster with a bunch of aging veterans, and they need to flip over a defense, and they're going to have a huge quarterback question. So there's situations across the league that are going to try to copy this. That's for sure.
I would assume
they need to sell it as the Patriots way.
I would assume that's how these guys got that job.
That's right.
By telling the owner, I'm going to bring the Patriot way here.
Oh, fantastic. They should be admired for how they've done things. It will be interesting to kind of wrap this part of the podcast up to see if more Major League Baseball teams follow the Astros way to win the World Series and how they spend this season. All right, with that, we're going to move on here, and a very interesting team coming up.
Today's Cap Fact.
All right, it's time for our Cap Fact, and we put the Cap Fact spotlight on one of the most amazing stories, Mike, in sports history. It's going on in the NHL, and it involves the Vegas Golden Knights doing some things that nobody expected and have never been done before.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. As you mentioned, they were, obviously an expansion team this past year. They kind of built their roster from that expansion draft, which is extremely difficult to do because teams obviously can designate, who goes where in terms of how that works out. But they have hit lightning in a bottle with not only the structure of their roster from a hockey standpoint, but they have the 23rd highest salary cap in the league. So it's not like they went and spent a ton of money and brought in gigantic contracts with veterans with experience to make this happen. You're talking about a lot of B players, right? You're talking about players that maybe were filtering off. They were on the backside of their careers, or younger guys who hadn't really panned out yet, and it's all just sort of happening at one time here in their very first year. Let me give you a number here. Since 1960, 0 expansion teams in the 4 major sports have had a winning record in their first year. Not only do they have a winning record, they have the best record in hockey right now.
Incredible.
Right. They have 66 points. They're certainly on track for the postseason. They were preseason 200-1 odds to win the Cup. They're now 7-1. That might even be higher now. They're a phenomenal story. I mean, they're playing great hockey. They're fun to watch. They're winning everywhere. They're obviously inspiring that Vegas crowd. In terms of season tickets and things like that. It's a great story for the league. It's good for hockey, and it's a cap management story is what it is.
Kevin, you're the hockey guy here. The expansion rules were different this time than they ever had been before, and I think that allowed players that would never, ever have been available to expansion team, like a James Neal or even some of the younger players. So while Mike's point is great, there were different rules. These rules were set up to make Vegas more successful.
Well, it gave George McPhee a lot of bargaining power. Okay, you don't want me to take that guy? Well, then give me this person and a pick. Like, he had a lot of currency to use in order to get better players on the roster. The salary cap also factored in because teams wanted to dump some contracts or sign those younger players who are coming off their entry-level deals. The NHL, they figured out peak playing ages are about 23 now to 32. So you have to pay those players coming off of that first-year contract. Now, their goaltender. We went way back about 20 minutes ago. We talked about the NHL. You need 2 goalies. Well, the Pittsburgh Penguins won the Stanley Cup with Murray, right? They've won a couple of Stanley Cups here. Went 3, right, under Crosby, 2 in a row. Well, they've done it with 2 different goaltenders, right? Another team. So Marc-Andre Fleury, they get the big salary out there. Now, he's injured this year again, concussion-wise, so there's some issues. But they got some legitimacy in net to start things off. And another goaltender, Malcolm Subban, whose brother is PK, who was a well-regarded prospect that was just pushing a roster spot. All right, so they had to move on. Getting James Neal, guy playing for a contract. Right? In the history of the National Hockey League, I've never seen a player that is in a contract year doesn't play great. Look at Evander Kane for the Buffalo Sabres. He's got an expiring contract. He's the most sought-after trade target in the NHL because he's playing for a new contract. So players who are, and they have about a handful of good players playing for contracts, and they're playing great. And they have an excellent coach.
Yeah, and it's back to our sustainability discussion, which is they may wind up doing some things that have never been done before, but can they sustain it?
Well, they've started to. They've signed 4. I think 4 of their guys have been extended thus far. They're the smaller guys in terms of how the money needed to be spread out. We talked about James Neal. That's certainly one that's going to come up here, right? Because I don't think they expected to be this high up the charts in terms of the standings, because I think some of those guys, maybe him included, was probably a trade candidate before the start of the year, right?
Correct.
This is a guy where, we're going to get him and keep him for a couple months and then flip him.
Correct.
And I don't think that's even a thought right now. So
they're probably thinking about, do we go out and get a Vander Kane?
Yeah,
right?
they're buyers for sure. So, their story has certainly flipped on edge, and that's definitely something to watch in this next month as that trade deadline comes up.
They have decent players. A guy like Eric Holla is a decent player. They've got a bunch of decent players. They don't have any great players, in my opinion, on their roster. They've guys who are playing great, but I think a lot of that, too, is Gerard Gallant, the coach.
Yes.
He's regarded as an excellent coach. Florida moved on from him. Life cycles of coaches are 3 years in the National Hockey League, or sometimes less, if you don't win. And that was the situation in Florida. But this is crazy. Actually, what they're doing. They're not supposed to be doing this, but they are.
You mentioned how they're sort of like, I mentioned, like B players, right? They're all sort of known players, but they never really hit their full potential in terms of their production. Does bringing a guy like Vander Kane mess up that chemistry? Right? I mean, do you bring a superstar in and he becomes the big horse in town? And how I feel like that might be a little bit poison to this conversation.
Sucks the air out of the room a little bit sometimes.
But rooms also want help.
They need it.
They know
it's a long season.
They know when they've got something, and they want a boost for the playoffs. So maybe it's not Kane. Maybe it's another player that's on an expiring contract that's been through the postseason. Another thing to point out too with Vegas is the top teams in the Western Conference are getting long in the tooth. And so it's not like, the L.A. Kings, for example. That's a team that's on the decline. They may make a playoff run. And matter of fact, when they won their cups, they barely got in, and they made great runs. The San Jose Sharks, they're a little long in the tooth there. Even the Blackhawks.
They look like they're having a bad year here. So
those teams have played a lot of hockey over the last 3-4 years, and that wears on players. So that, I think, factors in too to Las Vegas.
One all-encompassing final question here for you to wrap up everything that we've talked about here. Do fans have to change the way they think about their teams? Do fans have to be less loyal to players? And I could even equate it to you less. Don't buy that jersey.
That's right.
I mean, are all of these things changing the way sports is run? And are fans going to have to learn to change with it? If not, they're going to be in an uproar, and they're not going to get any satisfaction because people are not going to listen to them anymore.
The short answer is yes. The long answer is I don't think it'll ever happen, right? I mean, it's tough to be loyal and logical at the same time.
True.
That's just not how it works. Spotrac I've tried to bridge that gap. You know what I mean? I've tried to put some actual math to some of these equations. This is the time of year in the NFL where I throw out guys who I think might be on the roster bubble, things like that, and I always get backlash, right? I always get loyal fans who can't stand to see their guy go. But there's logic to it, and that's tough for some people to grasp. And, I think we'll get a little better at it together collectively. But, yeah, in terms of the sport itself and the teams themselves and how they're building, yeah, they are getting better at it. That's why we're seeing, what we talked about here, these underdogs sort of come through and get some success.
That's why you need to go to Spotrac.com, check out all of the great tools, whether it be league-wide, whether it be for your team, your favorite player. You can get all the information, all the sports at Spotrac.com. For Mike Giannetti and Paul Peck, I'm Kevin Sylvester. Thanks for listening to the Spotrac.com podcast.